Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Tracy Shields, and we're going to talk about her research. So, welcome, Tracy. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
The first question I usually ask everybody is, why, how, and when did you get started doing research on the family?
So, tiny little bit of background. My mother is all Italian, my father was Irish, but we were always much more involved in my mother's side of the family, closer to my mother's side of the family. And so, of course, I grew up with the belief that family is everything, and I loved my family, and we expressed a lot of joy and tradition when I was growing up. So by the time I became an adult and had children of my own, and Ancestry.com came along, I decided, wow, this was a great portal to filling in some of the pieces that my family wasn't able to fill in, some of the questions that we would have about my family that no one was able to answer. So, my mother, many years ago, did research on her mother's side, my grandmother, so my mother's mother. Her parents came from L'Aquila and Teramo, around Abruzzo area. So many years ago, she did research there, found birth certificates and things like that. Uh, and then years later, we decided to do her father's family, and he came from a small little town called Casalduni, uh, uh, northeast of Naples. And we didn't know anything about his family because basically his mother had left her five children, mostly all boys, and took off with another man and went to
Oh,
Detroit. Yeah, very
wow.
fun little. So nobody ever talked about her, and nobody ever knew a lot about her, never knew much about her. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to start to research her. And it kind of got started from there, trying to figure out who she was, why she left, where she came from.
So, no, so she was from, so I just want to make sure if I heard you right, she was born in Italy and she had come to America, or she went from Italy straight to Detroit?
So we're talking about my great grandparents
Yeah.
now. And my great grandparents, what we ended up finding out about this side of my family, my grandfather's mother and father, um, and in particular my great grandmother who left and went to Detroit. So she married my great grandfather Donato Izzo um, in I want to say 1899. She was 15 years old
Wow.
and he was 27 years old. They both grew up and were born in this little town, Casalduni. And when I tell you it's a little tiny town, it's a little tiny town. I was when I was we had recently gone there in August, my mother, my son, and myself to go do our research. And I was concerned about my mother walking. She's 72 years old. And when I looked at the map of the town, it literally takes 5 minutes to walk from one side of the town to the other side of the town. So I was like, oh, I can do this. She can do this. Um, so yeah, and then in they had a baby there. They got married in 1899, had a baby, and in 1901 they took the ship from Naples. They took a ship from Naples to I guess Castle Garden,
Mhm.
and uh, and they arrived in October of 1901. And together, I want to say they had eight children. And by the eighth child, she had had enough of my great grandfather, and I guess she left him for another man while they were living in Philadelphia, South Philadelphia. And she took her three youngest daughters, or she took her three daughters, and she left everybody else and went to Detroit and had two more children. And then the finale was my Aunt Dolly, who was the oldest daughter, was left to help raise my grandfather and the other children there. And my great grandmother, the one that took off and left, ended up dying at age 38 in childbirth with her 11th child. And the 11th child also passed away also.
Wow, that's some story. That's an
Yeah,
incredible story.
we were really surprised to learn those facts. Those you had asked me what were some really amazing facts that we had learned, and that was pretty much it. Learning all about her life was pretty cool because
Well,
nobody.
yeah, yeah, and women just didn't pick up and leave like that back then. That was
Yeah,
yeah, very unusual to do something like that.
very, very. But I heard, I did hear rumors that my great grandfather drank a lot and was angry, and so it's very possible that she couldn't deal with him. However, I think that there was a lot of hurt and sadness. My grandfather was left when he was 5 years old by his mother, and the fact that she left them behind is a sad fact. And we
Sure.
used to
Yeah.
used to they didn't like her very much, and she got a bad rap for leaving them behind for all these years. But who knows why she left them behind and took others with her.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that you have an Aunt Dolly. I haven't. I had an Aunt Dolly also, and you did not dare say her real name. You
Her, yes, was her real name by any chance Italia?
yes.
Oh no, maybe it was a maiden name.
That's
Italia.
incredible. Yeah. Wow, that's so funny.
Yeah. So where was this Aunt Dolly from?
Well, she was from the Bronx.
Okay.
She was born in the Bronx. So, boy, she'd be probably over 100 by now. Uh, but yeah, her name was Italia. Her last name was Di Panisse. That was her maiden name.
Wow,
Uh,
deep Denise. Okay.
and but that's so funny. That was a nickname for Italia.
Yeah, I don't know. Dolly. Maybe. Yeah, Dahlia. Dahlia. De
Well, yeah,
Italia.
yeah. That's probably how they got it from. But you didn't dare call her
No,
Italian. No
no,
way.
nobody ever called my Aunt Dolly Italia, but that was her name.
Wow, that's very funny. That's very funny. So you went back there in August. So when you went to the was that the first time you went to the town?
Yeah, I had only been to Italy once before, many, many years ago with my mother, and we went to Venice, which was, no relation to us whatsoever. We just decided we'll go to Milano and Venice. Um, and so this time, my mother had been back a couple times to the Abruzzo area, and but this time I had hopped on some message boards, which is where I thought which is where I met you or where you saw me, and one in particular was Casalduni Roots, and it was or it is run by a woman named Anna Salamone Frangiosa. She's in Australia, and she runs this website for Casalduni, and I, just would randomly read some of the posts and things, and I guess I started getting more involved once the pandemic hit. And not only that, but my sister-in-law said to me, I have my ex-husband is from Spain, so my two sons are half Spanish, and I was trying to get back to Spain, and I couldn't because of the pandemic. And my sister-in-law had suggested, why not try to apply for your Italian citizenship?
Hmm.
And so I guess I got more involved in trying to figure out which great grandparent could afford me the luxury of, processing that, or getting my citizenship. And so I started looking into my great grandfather and hanging out on the Casalduni page, and I just got more and more involved. And eventually, I found a company called Bella Italia Genealogy, run by a guy named Alessandro Bovino, and I can share that information with you. He's a great guy. He's all Italian, but he lived here for many years in the United States and speaks English like he was from, New York or whatever, maybe Chicago. I think that's where he spent most of his time. But I connected with him, and he offered to give me not only a tour of Casalduni because he works in the Campania region of Italy, but to also help me with some of my genealogy. In particular, wanted to find more information on my great grandparents, Donato Izzo and Carmela Romano was her name, his 15-year-old bride. And so I did. I hooked up with him, and through booking, and once the Italy opened up to foreigners again, to Americans in particular, we went there and stayed in Naples. So I actually stayed in Sorrento, and then took this whirlwind trip up to Casalduni with a fabulous driver that we had found through a company. I have to give you this guy's name because he was probably the comic relief of our entire day. Yeah, so we went up there in August. My mother, my son, and myself.
Um, so I want to ask you what it was like when you got there, but I used Alessandro also. So isn't this weird? We got the Dolly and we got the Alessandro connection. And I've been trying to get him on an interview for 2 years, and we had it booked, and then something happened. But I'll get him eventually. But I found him. Boy, I guess it's maybe 4 or even 5 years ago. I was really hired him to look for the Sorrentino family because I could not find anything about my father's family. There was nothing on the Antonati, nothing on family search, ancestry, nowhere, no how. So I hired him for that, but he found a lot of stuff and confirmed things on my grandmother's family that I was pretty sure, but I wasn't 100%. And he found a lot of records for my dad's mother, who comes from these two noble families, and with that help, I was able to piece together even more. Sorrentino, I hadn't heard from him for about a year, and I was just ready to give up. And my cousin Louisa, who used to live with my grandparents, the Sorrentino grandparents, and I would ask her questions, and because she kind of knew and there was nobody else to ask. She passed away. The day after she passed away, I get this data dump of the Sorrentino family.
Wow. Wow.
So coincidence, maybe.
Yeah.
It was, and Louise she could be a real pain in the ass. So if anything was going to prompt Alessandro to send this stuff, it was going to be her popping into his head one day.
Yeah.
And so I got a great records on my great grandfather, who I couldn't find, and able to connect his family back to like the early 1800s and find out exactly where they were from. We were told they were from Caserta. They were actually from Nocera Superior, and somehow they wound up in Naples. I'm not quite sure. So what was it like when you got back to the town? Emotional?
It was very emotional. It was very Casalduni, which is very close to Caserta, it's a very small rural village in the mountains, northeast of Naples, and it took forever to get there, and just winding up through countryside and farmland. And when we finally got there, it's the heat of August, and there's nobody in the streets because it's probably 11, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's too hot to really be out. But it was just a beautiful day, and some of these buildings haven't changed in 500 years. Who knows? Well, actually, it wouldn't be 500 years. It would around the time of 1846. When the town was rebuilt after um, I guess a civil war of some sort before the king took over. Um, but we met with the manager of the little museum there. His name is Mirko Borelli, and really super nice guy. And we had lunch at I guess his parents' place, or I shouldn't say lunch. We had a little snack of coffee, and it. My mother cried hysterically when she first arrived. It was very emotional for her, to be in the village of her grandparents, and so Alessandro began by giving us a tour of the genealogy and old signatures and marriage licenses and birth certificates and just very amazing documents with actual signatures of my grandfather, my great grandfather, and my great grandmother. And one of the interesting things he had mentioned, which I would have never thought, but they signed their name. They really signed their name, and some of these documents will have little bits of information on them that are really telling, like could not sign his own
Hmm.
name.
Right.
And but my great grandfather was able to sign his own name, and my 15-year-old great grandmother was able to sign her name, which was really amazing, because again, these people were peasants. My great grandfather was a shoemaker, and my great grandmother was a housewife. Um, and so there was that, and we took a tour and we found the streets that they grew up on, that they were born on, and that was amazing to see this. We weren't able to find the actual house, but I mean, there's like three or four houses on these streets, like nothing there, so you can really just assume that you found where they probably lived. But the most amazing thing that we ended up encountering, or discovering, I should say, was we went and had lunch at a winery up there, and I can't remember the name, but it's owned by a woman named Filomena Casbarra and her husband Tony De Ciccio. It's Decicco. I don't know how to pronounce that. Um, Fabulous couple. We had this wonderful lunch, a typical Italian lunch, and we were there. We were tired from walking around all day, and we were just they had, because it's a winery, they gave us wine, and the food was amazing. And at the end of eating our, I guess, second course, Alessandro says, "I have a surprise for you." But sitting around this table, and there was probably 10 other people there besides us, sitting around this table, you have family. We found
Oh, wow.
family here for you. And we were like, "What?" And it turned out that the owners of the winery themselves are our third cousins. So Filomena Casbarra and her brother Pino were our family members. And we were, amazed. Everybody was crying and hugging, and it was so cool. That was a really
That's
amazing part.
yeah, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. The picture behind me, that's my third great grandfather's palazzo
Very nice. That's a
in
really
in
nice
in
place.
Montebello. My mom's grandparents, not quite that big, but they actually did own their own house in Torito, which is,
Nice.
amazing as it was. It's like my uncle said, they were better off than most because they actually owned their own house. Um, but yeah, no, that's fabulous. I just recently found, I mean, after, I don't know, 15 years of doing this, I was able to make a connection to a second cousin in Italy through the Piramalo family, which I had never thought in a million years. I didn't even think I had anybody in Italy. But
Right.
I kept going back and forth with this Nicola Piramalo, and that was my great grandfather's name. And I couldn't piece it together. I couldn't piece together uh, his connection to me. And then with the help of a fourth cousin, Cincia, we were able to ascertain that I was, I knew that my grandfather had siblings, uh, um, and that's how we made the connection with her. I had one child was missing, or I had the name wrong. I don't remember which it was.
And there's so
Um,
many children in these families.
yeah, yeah, and I think I his one of the children's name was Enrico, and I think I had something else. It was close, but I had something else. Well, anyway, we were able to figure out that uh, Nicola's father was Roberto, and his father was Enrico,
Hmm.
and therefore we were second cousins. Well, we are second cousins.
Yeah, awesome.
You know, so we postponed the trip a couple of times. I mean, I'm going in April and May next year, no matter what, because we have this whole ancestry tour set up where I'm working with Italy Rooting, and she's going to bring us these, you know, places like this, and she's been working with my cousin Cinzia, who's been great. But I know we were there 25 years ago, and I hadn't
Time
started
to
all
go
of
back.
this. Yeah, and I hadn't started all of this stuff, and I found out that when we were in, we only stopped in Naples briefly, really just to get off the train and get into a car to drive to Sorrento. But my all of my great grandparents lived a half a mile from the train station, and I had no idea. I mean, we could have walked there.
Wow. So
Um,
frustrating. But maybe
it,
that's the driving force behind your research now.
well, yeah, you know, and I think it is, and I'm a firm believer in nothing happens by accident. You know, these you know, maybe it was meant for this our trip to be postponed because I found, you know, Roberto, and I hadn't known about him before. So I don't know. We'll see. So I have to ask you now. So now so you researched the Italian side. Did you research the Irish side too?
Yeah, actually, I did. The Irish side is pretty wacky and funny. My father was I want to say Irish, but there's a lot of British, Scottish, probably
Sure.
German in there also. But the Shields line, my last name is Shields, and the Shields line goes way back. There is no, we can't determine when they actually came, but it's very possibly in the late 1600s, early 1700s that they came. And there is a fabulous story which I would have to really dig deep, but and I don't have the time to do that right now. But there's a in Williamsburg, Virginia. There's a Shields Tavern, and it was owned in the 1700s by a William Shields, and his father um, had been kicked out of Ireland by the government and sent to Barbados, where he not only populated Barbados even more, but then 2 years later, he took a ship and came to Williamsburg, Virginia, and his son had started the Shields Tavern, and we believe that we go back to that line. But again, who knows? It's a very it's really funny how the Shields line is very entrenched in the United States, whereas my mother's family, I'm third generation Italian on my mother's side, but I go way, way back on my father's side. So it's,
Well, yeah, and that, you know, that's the case because they didn't start, you know, coming till much later. I have to send you the link to Kai White. Kai is he's an excellent, he's an author and a genealogist, and he's a West Point graduate, and he's researched his family. So if he knows anything about the Shields, that's the guy
oh,
to
nice.
ask because he would
Yeah.
know. And he did my chart. When I contacted him, because I knew he does these things with the you know, tracing back people here back to England, and if they have noble roots, and uh, all of that kind of stuff. So I said, well, I have noble roots in Italy. I said, but can you trace them back? And he said, I don't know. He said, tell me the family.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave him the family, and he said, oh yeah. He said I could trace them back, and he did this amazing chart for me. And he's an interesting guy anyway. But my children, they're adopted, and I've told this a couple of times. But my daughter, we were able to trace her family back, and she's a direct descendant of Daniel Boone.
Wow.
And a direct descendant of Captain Morgan the pirate. And she's also a dispenser from Princess Diana's line. And I said, your great whatever it was, grandfather was Daniel Boone. She said, who's that? I was like,
oh,
don't they teach this stuff in school anymore? But she was only 19 at the time. I was like, and as though, when I was growing up anyway, we had the Davy Crockett show and the Daniel Boone show. I guess that's all gone, so nobody knows about that stuff anymore. So it was pretty funny. But so that's why I asked about it, because I figured the Irish side, they've come early, but to be able to go back, because the Irish didn't come that early, but to your point, I guess if he was either kicked out or banished or whatever, that's why he wound up in Barbados,
Yeah, I have no idea.
It would be great to know if that pub is your family, though. That would be really cool to find out.
I would love to find that out. Again, the line through Ancestry.com seems to go right back there, but who knows? Who knows? I might be skipping somebody. And the more research I did on my Italian side, the more I realized the mistakes that you can make on Ancestry and the dead ends that you sometimes end up with. And that's part of what I really enjoy about researching. But it's also the frustrating part, that you think you've connected with people and they say, nope, sorry, I'm connected to the one in the Bronx, or I'm connected to the one in Chicago. It's like, oh, okay. Redirect.
Yeah. And that's what going back to Alessandro, that's where he helped with some of my paternal grandmother's side, but also finding somebody in Italy, because when I started questioning them and said, well, this is my third great grandfather, and he had, from what I found, he had, 3-4 sons and a couple of daughters, and you can have a connection to them. And when they started sending pictures, that was, and you could see the family resemblance. And there's one photo of, I guess Stefania's my third cousin, I think. Mm-hmm. And my cousin Susan is my second cousin. And there's pictures of this woman in Italy and my cousin Susan, and they could be sisters.
It's amazing, isn't
it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And and I know, DNA and all of that, but to be that far away and then to look so much alike, it's just incredible. And even a picture with, there's a photo of my I think my grandmother's first cousin, with her mother. Her mother at the time was 100 years old in 1960. But again, they could be sisters. They look that close,
Yeah, that's amazing.
And the same build and all of that kind of stuff. It's just really, really something to find that kind of stuff. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, I love this stuff. I would be doing it, and it's great to talk to people who have the same passion. Where I'm in a couple of groups now where we're trying to get this out to the younger people, because we're so worried about this history getting lost. What did your kids think about finding all of this stuff?
So my youngest son, who came with me, absolutely loved it. In fact, he's 21 years old. He was 20 when he came with me, and you wouldn't think that a 20-year-old would be interested in something like that. But at the end of the day, that one day that we spent in Casalduni, he just looked at me and he said, "Mom, I really thank you for sharing this. I'm so glad I came. This really meant a lot to me to see this side of my family and to know this history, because I think with him, I've really focused on the Spanish side.
Hmm.
Um, he lived in Spain for a while. I lived in Spain for a while, and so my mother would always get very frustrated. Like, don't forget the Italian side. Like, and so this was enlightening to him, I think, and I definitely know that he will continue to hold on to his Italian tradition, or recognize that it's there, and he's got access to all the research that I did, and that my mother did, which is great. My other son, not so much, but again, they're gonna have it all when I'm dead and gone. So
Um, yeah, and that's one of the things that we're trying to. So I'll let you know, and if he's interested, we're trying to do something similar. And Frank DiPiero, one of the guys that I'm working on with, he keeps saying the same thing over and over again. He said, we need to get the kids to Italy. He said,
yeah,
if we send 100 kids, he said 90 won't care, 10 will feel some connection. He said one or two are going to want to preserve this. And he
yeah,
says those are the people that we need to connect with. Going back to my generation, you know, 60 years ago or whatever, there were Polish schools in the Polish community. There were Hebrew schools in the Hebrew communities. Um, Spanish, of course, and they all of these people who do this stuff say the same thing. The Italians didn't do it, and
well,
he
they
said, "I'm
wanted to.
sure." I'm sure we all would have hated it if Mom sent us to Italian school on Saturday,
Yeah,
but we
yeah,
have that connection now, and that's one of the things that they're trying to invoke and try and get, because we're losing it in the States, and that's what everybody's worried
yeah.
about.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, that's part of being American, is to adapt and to kind of meld into the American culture. I have wonderful stories that I grew up with. That my grandmother spoke Italian when she was young, and then when she went into the school system and realized that everybody was speaking English, she wanted nothing to do with Italian.
Hmm.
And so she ended up speaking absolutely, just so perfectly. She was very, very well spoken woman. And I think it's because she spent her whole entire life trying to perfect the English language and get away from the Italian. And the same with my grandfather. And even now, my ex-husband, he would not speak to his own children, our children, in Spanish. Once he got here, that was it. It was just English. So this is why I ended up taking my children back to Spain and saying, "Look, this is your culture, this is your
Yeah.
language." And the younger one speaks Spanish fluently. The older one understands everything and speaks a little, but they know their culture. And so I feel very proud that, you know, of them for holding on to that. And I'm grateful that I had the sense to know to bring them back to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that was great. And like my parents spoke Italian, obviously, because both their parents did, but they didn't teach us.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, I probably would have hated going to Italian school, but
Yeah.
60 years later, 70 years
Right.
later, I would have been very happy to know it. So,
We have the words that the words here and there that my mother would use, but we don't. None of us speak Italian, but we like the statazit, and
yeah.
they're all pronounced incorrectly anyway. But
Yeah, aspet, that one, everybody knows that one,
right, right, I bet.
right?
And the funny thing is, when we went to Casalduni and we shared these words with the actual people there, they were like, like, what is that? And oh my God, we were in tears, laughing hysterically at how much the Italian Americans had botched up the language by the time they all got here.
Well, yeah, and my mom and dad used to fight all the time because my father his parents are from Naples and her parents were from Bari, and I mean, it was a completely different language. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And one of the mysteries here that we I created a book because my great grandfather was a chef, and he in South Philadelphia, and um, we were trying to figure out where some of the recipes had come from, and he was from Abruzzo, and the important thing was we grew up thinking all of his recipes were from Abruzzo. Well, that's not true. You know, he was sharing his recipes and he was talking about recipes with other guys that had come from Italy, from all over Italy.
Hmm.
So some of his recipes were from, you know, Sicily. Some of them were from the South. Some of them were I mean, mostly all of them were from Campania, but they weren't necessarily the recipes that he grew up with. And the same with the language and the words that they started to readapt here were shared between all of them. So
Right, right,
it
yeah,
changed.
yeah. I just got a couple of recipes from my cousin, real authentic Italian recipes, and I said, when I come, we have to write all of these down. I have a couple from my grandmother. I mean, I like to cook, so I have all kinds of cookbooks and stuff like that. But if you buy an Italian cookbook in America, chances are that's not what they eat in Italy. I mean, I found one or two that are pretty close, and but I just spoke with somebody from there, and I asked her that question. I said, what's the difference? And she said, the way you eat it. She says, you put everything on the plate at the same
Right.
time. We don't do.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. That's a big difference. But I'll tell you something, when you eat someone's home cooking, the home cooking is still very, very traditional.
Mhm.
So when you go to a restaurant, of course, you're going to get, Italian fusion now in Naples or wherever you go, Sorrento. You're going to get, totally different kinds of foods in the restaurants in Italy today. But when you go to someone's home in Italy, and they still carry those traditions, that sauce is very, very similar to the sauce that I grew up with.
Right.
Like that doesn't change, and it's cooked for hours. And the way they communicate about food is that's still a shared connection that we have. The way we communicate about food is, food is life, and we talk about how it's made and how long it sits, and how when you were a child you came in and you dipped the bread in the, well, we say gravy here in Philadelphia, but it's, obviously sauce there. um, they still talk about it like that, and those kinds of things are what never seems to go away.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Exactly. Exactly. Well, thanks again. But it's like saying the Italian goodbye. I thanked you, and now I thank you again, and we'll try to get out
Yeah,
the door at some point. But
yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time and giving us your stories.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.